Andrea Mitchell, our chief foreign affairs correspondent, has been going through what we just heard from Edward Snowden and the claims he makes about his job history, title, and background. She's joined us tonight from our D.C. newsroom. And Andrea, so it begins. This was the most basic predicate prior to getting into our conversation with him that lasted several hours.
Indeed, Brian, and no matter what people think of Edward Snowden, there's no question he had an enormous impact on U.S. intelligence, an influence far greater than his official resume. Who is Edward Snowden? Here's how the administration and congressional critics described him when he first exposed the secret surveillance program.
No, I'm not going to be scrambling jets to get a 29-year-old hacker.
And this from the leaders of the House Intelligence Committee.
I think he was lying.
I think it's illustrated in his own mind.
He clearly has overinflated his position. He has overinflated his access, and he's even overinflated what the actual the technology of the programs would allow one to do.
What does the record show? From our reporting, the Defense Intelligence Agency says Snowden was a guest speaker at 3 of their conferences on military cybersecurity, including one in Japan, focusing on the Chinese cyber threat. Critics and supporters acknowledge Snowden is whip smart, able to get into the system, know what he was taking, cover his tracks, plot his escape. Michael Leiter is an NBC analyst and serves on an NSA advisory panel.
The amount of information that Snowden was able to exfiltrate from the NSA is truly mind-boggling. And it does show a real weaknesses on NSA's part of protecting that information.
Do they even know to this day how much he took?
The government is still working through to understand exactly what Edward Snowden got.
What is also undisputed, Snowden's impact has been huge.
I'm speaking, of course, about the most massive and most damaging theft of intelligence information in our history by Edward Snowden.
It started right away, 2 days after Snowden's first leak. The president, in his first summit with China's President Xi, was on defense over cyber war. Instead of demanding that China stop attacking America's computers, officials say Xi told them, "You are the aggressor." Also damaging, documents Snowden supplied to journalists revealing that the U.S. spied on America's most important European ally, Germany's Angela Merkel, and on Brazil's President Dilma Rousseff, who called off a state visit to Washington, to say nothing of handing Vladimir Putin a huge propaganda victory. Snowden's disclosures not only damaged the president's relationships with key allies, it also hurt his credibility with a key part of his political base, younger people who are among those most critical of the surveillance policies. Brian?
Andrea Mitchell in our D.C. newsroom tonight. Andrea, thanks. We will hear more, of course, from Edward Snowden starting tomorrow evening here on this broadcast. Then our hour-long primetime special that airs tomorrow night at 10, 9 Central on this NBC station. Good evening. In a little over 24 hours, we will hear from Edward Snowden, the 30-year-old American who is responsible for the most staggering theft of American intelligence secrets in the modern era. He is wanted on espionage charges. He continues to live in exile in Russia. A number of people in high positions in the government and the intelligence community are anxious to hear what he says, understandably, when we air our conversation with him tomorrow evening in prime time. We met with him last week in Moscow. Tonight, a portion of that conversation, something he's never spoken of before on camera, about what he did for the government and how he describes his job, his training, and his career right up until he put an end to it.
Were you trained as a spy? It seems to me spies probably look a lot more like Ed Snowden and a lot less like James Bond these days.
Well, it's no secret that the U.S. tends to get more and better intelligence out of computers nowadays than they do out of people. I was trained as a spy in sort of the traditional sense of the word, in that I lived and worked undercover overseas, pretending to work in a job that I'm not, and even being assigned a name that was not mine. But I am a technical specialist. I am a technical expert. I don't work with people. I don't recruit agents. What I do is I put systems to work for the United States. And I've done that at all levels, from the bottom on the ground all the way to the top. Now, the government might deny these things. They might frame it in certain ways and say, oh, well, you know, he's a low-level analyst. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to use one position that I've had in a career here or there to distract from the totality of my experience, which is that I've worked for the Central Intelligence Agency, undercover, overseas. I've worked for the National Security Agency, undercover, overseas. And I've worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency as a lecturer at the Joint Counterintelligence Training Academy, where I developed sources and methods for keeping our information and people secure in the most hostile and dangerous environments around the world. So when they say I'm a low-level systems administrator, that I don't know what I'm talking about, I'd say it's somewhat misleading.
Edward Snowden, the man who asks people to call him Ed, who was initially called a 29-year-old hacker by President Obama and was variously labeled a systems analyst and a private contractor in the news media, explaining to us that his actual job and his training for all those years went under quite a different title.